In a previous segment, we discussed this famous Argentinian tragedy that did occur at the interzonal in Swedish town of Göteborg. But why did Argentinians try to come up with a new concept during the tournament? What did go wrong? So we should look backward in 1954, where the move F4 was gradually introduced into the serious practice. As we already know, beforehand, White always played Queen F3 and refrained from immediate F4 because F4 looked a little bit dubious since White discovered that Black had a dangerous move Queen B6, trying to exploit the weaknesses of White's position in the center and also keeping an eye on this pawn on B2. By the old-fashioned standards, if we could have asked Steinitz or Tarash, obviously Queen B6, the move like Queen B6 wouldn't be even considered, and I'm sure anybody who played this move would be condemned by the founding fathers of positional chess. Probably the entire Najdorf system would be condemned, because all the moves played by Black and probably also by White did not fit the strategies that were popular many decades ago. But in 40s and 50s, professional players, they had a different look at the well-known positions, and they were always coming up with new concepts. So 40s and 50s were full of discoveries, and that's the beginning of the real development of the theory of sharp lines in Najdorf. And that's the subject of our research now. So F4 and Queen B6. Now, so pawn B2 is hanging, knight on D4 is also a little bit vulnerable, and White has to make a decision, either to take this back knight, and just to go back knight B3, but that's not what sharp players want to do, because knight is leaving this dominant square, and obviously there's less pressure on E6 square, and any attack will slow down, because with knight on B3 and knight on C3, it takes more time to develop strong initiative. Or White has to consider a sacrifice, sacrificing pawn on B2. Well, pawn is a pawn, but we should remember that this pawn is not just an ordinary pawn. If you look at White pawns, any pawn is important, of course, but this B2 pawn actually cements White's position on the queen side. And when this pawn is lost, knight on C3 is very weak. So it's not just losing a pawn, but it's totally compromising White's position on the queen side. And by sacrificing it, White actually tells Black, we're going to kill you instantly and very soon, before you can exploit your material advantage, and before you can attack the knight on C3, which is hanging. And also, it's not just the knight on C3, but this knight on C3 is vital to defend White's position in the center. Later, of course, the other ways were developed, even sacrificing the pawn. White could try to play positionally. We'll take it step by step, once at a time. Queen B6, according to the Mega database, was first introduced by David Bronstein, but I'm sure there were probably some other games that were not yet shown on the database, and that was, as we know, this move posed a very serious dilemma. And this move was considered to be the simplest remedy against White's attack, starting with seventh move F4. And Panel, facing Keris in the 12th round of the Göteborg interzonal, played Queen B6. And suddenly, Paul Keris played Queen D2, sacrificing this pawn on B2. After some consideration, Panel decided not to take an offer, and he played knight C6, and after castle, exchange on D4, white eventually won the endgame. Tells probably more about the playing strengths of Keris and his opponent, but it was quite obvious for the players at that tournament that the only way to refute Queen d2 would be taking on b2. So the history has begun, the big history. In round 14, all Argentinian players switched to bishop e7 at move 7, and this famous strategy had happened. But in round 16, a Yugoslav player, Federer, decided to test Keris' resolution and played queen b6. Keris played queen d2, and Federer took pawn on b2. So that's the beginning of our story. And Keris attacked immediately. Rook d1, queen a3, e5. Very, very natural, because white is ahead in the development. And he's just trying to crush black's position in the center. But just, we have to understand, playing e5, white is burning all the bridges. Because now white must win at any cost, very quickly. Otherwise, its position will be totally compromised. And there will be no even slightest hope for a positional compensation based on a better development of the pieces, because the pawn on e5 is weak, and now black bishop could be developed either on e7 or on b4. But everything happens on a much slower fashion in the chess theory, because most of the things that are absolutely natural for us today, most of the things that every graduate, a chess graduate, learns from a computer database, were the professional players learned after making big mistakes. So just consider that every bit of knowledge that you can download from your computer was paid by blood of some players that were massacred in the games when they tried to actually find the route, the safe route in the minefield. So Federer decided that he could keep this tension in the center and played knight fd7, which proved to be probably a decisive mistake already. And Keris immediately used his opponent's indecision. He played f5, sacrificing second pawn, and after knight takes e5, f6, and bishop a2, white is 2 pawns down, but now it castles, and it seems that black king will have to stay in the center. And maybe Federer could fight a better game, but after knight c6, knight takes e6, bc6, knight e4, d5, castle, he found himself under terrible, very, very strong attack, and he couldn't find any way to resist, and in a couple of moves everything was over. So it's also important to remember that white knight goes on e4, and it actually cuts, black king from queen going backward on a5, and even that black queen on a3 is not an immediate danger. It's still a little bit cut from main battleground, and just you should recognize that one point playing rook b3, white is pushing black queen to a4, where it will be not able to help its king, providing the necessity is there. So e5 looked very strong, and for a while the black players took a timeout.